The moment Justice Clarence Thomas raised his voice, everyone knew something dangerous was about to happen. But no one expected Jasmine Crockett to flip the entire room on its head.
It started with a moment so shocking that even veteran reporters, the kind who had covered political storms for decades, gasped on live television. They weren't expecting history to unfold, not today, not like this. But inside the packed Supreme Court adjacent hearing room, you could feel the electricity in the air long before the first word was spoken. The atmosphere was already tight enough to snap. Lawmakers whispered urgently to one another, staffers rushed across the aisles clutching folders and tablets, and every news camera in the room zoomed in the instant Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett stepped through the door. The shutter clicks intensified, the murmurs rose, and every person present leaned forward because everyone knew a confrontation was brewing. Crockett walked with the confidence of someone fully prepared for whatever storm was coming. Her posture was straight, her expression composed, but her eyes held the intensity of a woman who had done her homework and wasn't afraid to speak truth in the face of power. The country had seen her stand up to senators, challenge officials, and dismantle arguments with surgical precision. But today's challenge was different. Justice Clarence Thomas sat at the center of the panel, elevated slightly above the lawmakers, his hands folded calmly, eyes heavy but alert. He rarely showed emotion. He rarely spoke at all. But today, he was already tense. He knew Crockett had questions, real questions, and he knew those questions were going to be uncomfortable. But no one expected how explosive his reaction would be. Crockett took her seat, adjusted her microphone, and began speaking with controlled precision. She questioned the legitimacy of recent judicial decisions, highlighted inconsistencies, and pushed hard on ethical controversies that had been simmering for months. It was factual, direct, and unapologetically bold. Then, it happened. Before she could finish her sentence, Thomas leaned forward, his voice slicing through the room like a blade. "That's enough. Sit down. If you continue, I will direct security to remove you." Gasps erupted. People turned in their seats. A reporter even dropped her pen. It was the kind of moment that stops time. For a split second, it truly looked like he was attempting to order her arrest, or at the very least silence her by force. Security guards standing by the walls exchanged confused glances, unsure whether that was a serious command or a momentary burst of anger. But Crockett didn't flinch. Not even a blink. Instead, she slowly rose, not in panic, but with the calm, deliberate composure of someone who had been underestimated too many times and was done allowing it. She took one step forward toward the microphone, stared directly at Justice Thomas with unwavering focus, and in that moment, the entire hearing flipped upside down. The room, the cameras, the nation, all locked onto her. The silence wasn't empty, it was heavy, like the air itself was waiting to see what she would do. Crockett's voice, when she finally spoke, didn't shake, it didn't quiver, it didn't retreat. Instead, it carried immense clarity and conviction, amplified by the stunned silence around her. "Justice Thomas," she began slowly, "with all due respect, you do not have the authority to silence a sitting member of Congress in the middle of an oversight hearing. And you certainly do not have the power to threaten me with removal for asking questions the American people deserve answers to." A collective gasp swept across the room again, this time louder. Thomas stiffened, his jaw tightened. The cameras captured every shift in his expression, every flicker of unease crossing his face. For a man who had built a reputation of stoic calm, this was the first visible crack. Crockett continued, her tone rising just enough to make sure every single word landed with impact. "Threatening to remove me doesn't solve the problem. Answering the questions does." Journalists typed furiously. Senators whispered intensely among themselves. Social media, though no one in the room could see it, was already erupting as clips from reporters' live streams began circulating. Thomas attempted to regain control. "Congresswoman, your line of questioning is inappropriate. You are out of order." Crockett smiled, not mockingly, but knowingly, the kind of smile that told everyone she had been waiting for that exact response. She leaned closer to her microphone. "Out of order," she repeated. "No, Justice Thomas. What's out of order is a justice thinking he can intimidate a lawmaker for demanding transparency. What's out of order is using power as a shield against accountability." A low wave of whispers spread again. The guards who had tensed at his earlier command now stood still, their hands at their sides. No one moved to approach her. No one dared. Thomas blinked, realizing what everyone else already knew. His threat had not silenced her. It had empowered her. It had turned the spotlight directly back onto him. Crockett slowly placed her papers on the desk, never breaking eye contact, as she added, "I'm not going anywhere, and neither are the questions." The room was stunned. She had flipped the entire dynamic. Thomas leaned back, visibly regretting his earlier outburst. His expression now held something unfamiliar, a mix of embarrassment, frustration, and recognition that the moment had escaped his control. Meanwhile, Crockett stood taller than ever, not because of defiance, but because of truth. And everyone watching, in the room and across the nation, understood that this was no ordinary confrontation. This was a historic moment, born from courage, clarity, and the refusal to be silenced.
Crockett's voice was steady but fiery, the kind of tone that signals someone is done being silenced. It was the voice of someone who had watched powerful men dodge accountability for years and had decided this was the moment to draw the line. The room could feel it too. Her tone didn't crack, didn't soften, didn't retreat. It carried the weight of truth and the force of someone who knew the stakes. She leaned slightly toward her microphone, eyes locked on Justice Clarence Thomas, and delivered the sentence that would echo across the nation. "Justice Thomas, with all due respect, you don't have the authority to arrest a sitting member of Congress for doing her job, but I do have the right to question your actions." The words detonated like a thunderclap. Gasps shot through the room, sharp, loud, uncontrollable. These weren't quiet reactions. These were the kinds of gasps that signal everyone had just witnessed a moment that should not have happened but absolutely needed to. Lawmakers leaned back in their chairs. Some covered their mouths. Others stared at Crockett with stunned admiration. A few even shook their heads, realizing instantly that this exchange would dominate headlines for days, maybe weeks. Justice Thomas's expression tightened, his jaw set, eyes narrowing just enough for the cameras to catch it. For a man famous, almost legendary, for showing no expression during proceedings, this was as emotional as he ever looked. He had spent years on the bench avoiding confrontation, avoiding extended speaking, avoiding controversy. But Crockett's direct challenge pierced through that facade. The cameras zoned in immediately, capturing every tiny movement, the slight shift in his shoulders, the uncomfortable readjustment of his robe, the tightening grip on the papers in front of him. Reporters knew they were witnessing something historic. Thomas was rattled. He cleared his throat, voice stern but noticeably strained. "The integrity of this court is not up for debate here, Congresswoman," he said. "It was meant to reestablish control. It failed." Crockett shot back instantly, not angrily, but with calm precision. "Exactly. That's why it needs to be debated, because when integrity is questioned, silence is not an answer. Accountability is." A wave of murmurs swept through the room. Staffers paused mid-step, frozen with folders half open. Journalists typed so fast their keyboards clicked like rainfall. Aides from both sides leaned toward one another, whispering things like, "Did she just say that?" and "This is going to be everywhere." Even the security guards standing along the walls looked uneasy. They weren't sure whether they were supposed to intervene, follow Thomas's earlier command, or simply pretend nothing was happening. Their eyes darted between Thomas and Crockett, waiting for some kind of cue that never came. Because Crockett had taken control. The energy in the room shifted, sharply, unmistakably. No longer was this a hearing dominated by a senior justice. No longer was this a space where intimidation was enough to silence difficult questions. Crockett had turned the room into a stage for accountability, and she wasn't letting it go. Thomas shifted again, adjusting his robe, glancing at the chairperson, almost searching for backup. But no one stepped in. Even those who disagreed with Crockett politically knew this wasn't the moment to interrupt her. Her conviction filled the room too powerfully. Crockett continued, her voice steadier than ever, her words crisp. The American people deserve answers, they deserve clarity, and they deserve transparency from the highest court in the country. Thomas exhaled, slowly, sharply, a sign the cameras didn't miss. This wasn't frustration with the topic, this was frustration that he had lost control of the room. Crockett wasn't finished. She placed a hand on her notes but didn't look down. She didn't need a script for truth. Threats don't erase questions, and intimidation doesn't erase responsibility. More gasps, more typing. One reporter whispered, "This is going to break the internet." Crockett stepped back for a moment, letting her words and the silence settle. It was a move that seasoned speakers use to amplify impact, and it worked flawlessly. The room was completely still, waiting for what she would say next. She finally leaned in one more time, voice softer, but somehow even stronger. "I came here to uphold democracy, not to be silenced by fear." That line became the turning point. Thomas's face shifted again, this time from frustration to something more subtle but unmistakable: regret. Regret for raising his voice, regret for threatening to remove her, regret for underestimating her. Because instead of ending her statement, he had supercharged it. Instead of silencing her, he had elevated her. Instead of asserting power, he revealed vulnerability. The entire room could feel it. The balance of authority had shifted, and Jasmine Crockett was now steering the moment with absolute control. Justice Thomas looked down at his notes, but it was too late. He had lost the exchange, he had lost the room, and he had definitely lost the narrative. Crockett, however, stood firm, unshaken, unbothered, unbroken. The world had just watched her transform a threat into the most powerful moment of the entire hearing. And from that point forward, everyone knew. This wasn't just a clash. This was a turning point, one that Justice Thomas would regret instantly, and the nation would remember for a long, long time. This is where things took a dramatic turn. Up until this moment, the tension had been building slowly, a clash of authority, flashes of anger, and two powerful personalities refusing to back down. But what happened next shifted the hearing from heated to historic. Justice Thomas tried to regain control of the room. His voice, which had earlier sliced through the air like a command, now sounded noticeably more controlled, almost eager to move forward. "Let's continue with the next speaker," he said, gesturing to the chair. But Jasmine Crockett didn't budge. She didn't lean back. She didn't mute her microphone. She didn't even blink. Instead, she held her ground with the kind of determination that stops an entire room cold. "I haven't finished, Justice Thomas." He froze. The chair froze. The entire room froze. There is a specific kind of silence that only appears when someone powerful realizes they've lost control. And this was that silence. Crockett reached calmly into a large folder in front of her. The sound of paper sliding out echoed across the room, because everything else had gone still. Even the reporters typing paused, waiting for whatever was coming next. Then she lifted the documents into view. The cameras reacted instantly, zooming in, flashing, autofocusing. Every network wanted the shot. Every journalist sensed a bombshell was seconds away. "These," Crockett declared, her voice steady and cutting through the silence like a laser, "are records showing months of unanswered ethics complaints involving your office, Justice Thomas." A ripple shot through the room.
Sharp, electric, impossible to ignore. You may not want accountability, she continued, lifting the pages slightly higher, but the American people deserve it. For the first time that day, Thomas leaned back in his chair, not with confidence, but with something much more revealing: discomfort. It moved slowly across his face, first a pinch of the eyebrows, then the tightening of his jaw, then the slight swallow that only the sharpest cameras caught. This was not the direction he wanted the hearing to go. He had expected a clash. He had expected a tough question or two. But he never expected Crockett to walk in with documents, receipts, and the courage to confront him head-on in front of the entire nation. Crockett continued, unwavering, her voice gaining strength with every word. So before you threaten to remove me, perhaps you should explain why so many of your actions remain unaddressed. Somewhere in the back of the room, someone whispered, "Oh my God," because everyone knew exactly what was happening. She wasn't just asking a question. She wasn't just defending her time. She was holding one of the most powerful judicial figures in American history live, on camera, in the middle of a proceeding he thought he controlled. Silence gripped the room. Not a normal silence, but a silence full of fear, shock, and adrenaline. Lawmakers exchanged stunned looks. Representatives leaned forward in disbelief. Staffers sat frozen, their hands hovering over laptops. Even security guards, who usually gave no reaction, stared at Crockett with widened eyes. This moment meant something, something big, something everyone in the room felt in their bones. Crockett had cornered him. Not with insults, not with emotion, but with facts, preparation, and courage. And she did it fearlessly. Justice Thomas tried to respond, or at least tried to appear like he would respond. He opened his mouth slightly, inhaled as if preparing to speak, but no words came out. Not a single one. The reality hit him like a cold wave. Anything he said now could make things worse. Any denial could be questioned. Any explanation could be dissected. His advisors sitting directly behind him exchanged anxious glances. One shifted in his seat. Another leaned forward slightly, as if mentally begging Thomas to stay quiet. A third closed his eyes for a moment, as if realizing the damage could already be irreversible. The pressure in the room was crushing, the type of pressure that only exists when truth is exposed in real time. Crockett lowered the documents slowly, deliberately, never breaking eye contact. Thomas swallowed again, another small but very telling detail. He looked down at the desk, his fingers tapped once on the wood, then stopped. Because he finally realized what everyone else already understood. This was the moment he would regret his earlier threat. This was the moment that transformed a tense exchange into a national spectacle. This was the moment he lost control of the narrative, and Crockett seized it with absolute authority. She had stood her ground. She had refused to yield. She had presented evidence he didn't expect. And she had exposed with stunning clarity the consequences of trying to intimidate her. Justice Thomas had tried to silence Jasmine Crockett. He had tried to push her aside. He had even tried to have her removed. But now, he's the one struggling to speak. He's the one cornered. He's the one silently wishing he could rewind the last 5 minutes. And all around him, the room knew it. The turning point had arrived. The moment of regret had landed. And Jasmine Crockett stood exactly where she intended to stand, in full control.
Within minutes, the clip hit social media. Even before the hearing ended, phones across the room buzzed with notifications. Staffers exchanged stunned looks as live stream reactions exploded. News outlets posted the moment instantly, and in seconds, the views skyrocketed. Millions of views, thousands of comments, people calling it the moment Thomas realized he picked the wrong fight.
X, Twitter, was flooded. YouTube notifications crashed. TikTok clips hit 100,000 views before anyone even blinked. But what the world saw online was only a fraction of what those inside the room had already felt. Because the regret, the real raw regret, was visible on Justice Clarence Thomas's face long before the internet crowned Crockett the winner. Inside the chamber, the air was tight, thick, almost heavy. After several long seconds of silence, Thomas finally spoke, but the booming authority from earlier had vanished. This time, his voice was noticeably lower, lighter, almost unsure. "Congresswoman, you're out of line." It was supposed to be a reprimand, a final attempt to claim control, a reminder that he believed he still held the upper hand. But the words fell flat. They carried no power, no force, no dominance. And Crockett felt that instantly. She didn't miss a beat. She didn't pause to think. She didn't check her notes. She didn't hesitate for even half a second. Instead, she fired back with a precision that stunned the entire room. "No, Justice Thomas, what's out of line is using threats instead of transparency. What's out of line is trying to intimidate a woman, a lawmaker, and a representative of the American people." Her voice was strong, not loud, but powerful, not emotional, but direct, not angry, but unshakably firm. Every word hit like a hammer. Reporters scribbled so fast their pens nearly tore the paper. A few had their mouths slightly open because they knew exactly what they were witnessing. A once-in-a-generation confrontation between truth and power, between accountability and authority, between intimidation and courage. Crockett wasn't speaking for shock value. She wasn't performing for the cameras. She wasn't trying to go viral. Her passion wasn't anger, it was conviction. You could hear it in the steady rhythm of her voice. You could see it in her posture, straight and grounded. You could feel it in the room, pulsing like a heartbeat. And that's why her words carried weight far beyond the hearing room. They carried the weight of people who felt unheard, the weight of citizens who wanted answers, the weight of voters tired of secrecy, silence, and untouchable power. Justice Thomas felt it too. When Crockett finished speaking, he didn't respond immediately. He couldn't. His expression shifted again, this time slower, heavier, unmistakable. The regret was climbing up his face like a shadow. He looked down, then up, then away, anywhere except at Crockett. Because in that moment, something became clear to him, painfully clear. He could not silence her, he could not intimidate her, and he definitely could not make her back down. Not today, not in this hearing, not in front of the entire nation. He had underestimated her. Deeply. He had assumed she would fold after his earlier threat. He had assumed she would soften, yield, or step aside. But instead, she stood stronger, louder, sharper, more focused. His attempt to overpower her had done the opposite. It had unleashed a moment of courage so powerful that the entire room had shifted around it. And the cameras caught everything, the wavering in his tone, the unease in her posture, the way his earlier confidence dissolved into something quieter, something smaller. Meanwhile, Crockett held her position like a pillar, unmoved, unimpressed, unafraid. Every reporter in the room felt it. Every senator and representative felt it. Even the security guards, who rarely showed emotion, knew they were witnessing a major shift. The authority in the room no longer belonged to Thomas. It belonged to Jasmine Crockett. And in that moment, the hearing transformed. It wasn't just about ethics anymore. It wasn't just about documents or complaints. It wasn't even about political rivalry. It had become a story of power being challenged by truth, and truth refusing to bow. Thomas took another slow breath, visibly trying to regain composure. But the hesitation was unmistakable. His authority had cracked, and the crack was growing with every second Crockett held her ground. Somewhere in the back of the room, a staffer whispered, "He shouldn't have threatened her. He really shouldn't have." Because now the entire nation had seen it. A Supreme Court justice had tried to silence a congresswoman, and instead exposed his own vulnerability. And Jasmine Crockett? She had shown the country exactly what happens when someone refuses to be intimidated by power. The regret on Thomas's face told the whole story. He had underestimated her. He had picked the wrong fight, and the world was watching him realize it.
The tension inside the committee room had already reached a breaking point, but when Justice Clarence Thomas made his veiled threat, suggesting that Representative Jasmine Crockett could be removed or even arrested if she continued pressing him, the entire atmosphere shifted. Lawmakers froze, aides exchanged anxious looks, the air became thick with disbelief. But Jasmine Crockett didn't blink. She leaned forward, steady, focused, refusing to give an inch. Her voice didn't rise, and she didn't match Thomas's tone. Instead, she did something far more powerful. She doubled down on the truth. And that's when everything exploded. The chair of the committee eventually stepped in, raising a hand and attempting to cool the temperature in the room. "Let's keep this civil," he said, trying to restore order. But the damage was already done. Justice Thomas had crossed a line, and Crockett wasn't about to let that go unanswered. Thomas folded his hands tightly on the table, attempting to regain his composure. But no amount of posturing could hide the fact that his threat had backfired in the most embarrassing way. What was meant to intimidate had instead exposed him. His silence was heavy, almost defensive, the silence of someone who realizes too late that they pushed too far. Crockett inhaled deeply, gathered her papers, and then delivered a closing statement that would dominate headlines across the country. Her voice was calm, but every word hit like a hammer. "Justice Thomas, accountability isn't optional, not even for you. So if you believe asking tough questions deserves a rest, then maybe the problem isn't my words, it's your actions." The instant the sentence ended, the room detonated. Some gasped loudly, some whispered, hands covering their mouths. Others exchanged looks of absolute shock, and a few, unable to contain their approval, clapped softly before being quickly told to stop. It was one of those moments that didn't just land, it echoed. Justice Thomas sat motionless, his earlier bravado nowhere to be found. His posture stiffened, his gaze dropped, and his shoulders tightened. He didn't interrupt, he didn't rebut, he didn't even attempt to reclaim control of the room. Because he couldn't. The threat he tried to wield like a weapon had evaporated in front of everyone. Crockett had turned it back on him with precision, with clarity, and with the confidence of someone who refuses to be bullied by power, no matter how high that power sits. She didn't just counter his threat, she dismantled it. Slowly she packed her papers, each movement deliberate and unrushed. It was the poise of someone who knew she hadn't simply won an argument, she had shifted the balance of the room. She had shown that fear has no place when justice is on the line. Cameras tilted toward her, reporters whispered her name, phones came up across the room. The image being recorded wasn't just a politician gathering her documents, it was the image of a lawmaker who had just turned intimidation into empowerment. She stood, adjusted her jacket, and walked out not with anger or drama, but with calm, controlled confidence. The kind that follows someone who knows they said exactly what needed to be said. Behind her, Justice Thomas remained seated, smaller somehow, dwarfed not by the room, but by the moment. His attempt to silence her had not only failed, it had highlighted his vulnerability. His threat was now the story,
His reaction was now the headline. His silence was now the message the nation would remember. Outside the chamber, reporters immediately swarmed. Flocks of cameras followed her down the hallway like she was a keynote speaker at a national event, not just a representative leaving a tense hearing. People didn't see a lawmaker walking away. They saw a force, a voice, a challenger unafraid to confront power head-on. She didn't just counter his threat, she dismantled it. Slowly, she packed her papers, each movement deliberate and unrushed. It was the poise of someone who knew she hadn't simply won an argument, she had shifted the balance of the room. She had shown that fear has no place when justice is on the line. Cameras tilted toward her, reporters whispered her name, phones came up across the room. The image being recorded wasn't just a politician gathering her documents, it was the image of a lawmaker who had just turned intimidation into empowerment. She stood, adjusted her jacket, and walked out not with anger or drama, but with calm, controlled confidence. The kind that follows someone who knows they said exactly what needed to be said. Behind her, Justice Thomas remained seated, smaller somehow, dwarfed not by the room, but by the moment. His attempt to silence her had not only failed, it had highlighted his vulnerability. His threat was now the story, his reaction was now the headline, his silence was now the message the nation would remember. Outside the chamber, reporters immediately swarmed. Flocks of cameras followed her down the hallway like she was a keynote speaker at a national event, not just a representative leaving a tense hearing. People didn't see a lawmaker walking away. They saw a force, a voice, a challenger unafraid to confront power head-on. Social media lit up within minutes, clips spread like wildfire, hashtags were created before she even reached the elevator. Commentators across the political spectrum replayed the moment again and again, analyzing the tone, the bravery, the clarity. And one theme kept appearing everywhere. She refused to be intimidated. Justice Clarence Thomas had walked into that hearing believing his position, his age, and his influence were enough to silence critics. But Jasmine Crockett showed him and the entire country that accountability doesn't bow to titles, it doesn't fear threats, it doesn't sit quietly when democracy is at stake. He tried to use his power to arrest her with fear. But instead, he arrested nothing and exposed everything. By the time the day ended, the narrative was crystal clear. Crockett didn't just push back, she stood taller than the threat, louder than the intimidation, and sharper than the silence that followed. She walked out more powerful than she walked in. Justice Thomas, meanwhile, was left with the realization that the real danger to him wasn't Jasmine Crockett's questions, it was the truth behind them. And as the cameras captured her final steps out of the building, one thing became undeniable. He tried to silence her, but in the end, he only strengthened her voice and weakened his own. If this moment shook you, hit subscribe, because the truth is only getting louder from here. This is the kind of accountability they fear, and the kind we'll keep exposing. Don't miss what comes next.